if you're doing something and it doesn't feel right, if it just doesn't feel right in your gut, you got to stop and take a look at that. Um, I think about, I started this business 20 years ago. For the first 4 or 5 years, I was always worried about where the next client would come from. And so there was an element of fear in that. And so I think once I got comfortable past that time frame and knew I could support the team and I could do, support my family and that type of thing, um, I was able to overcome that fear and become, I think, better at what I do. Because then I want, people can smell desperation. If you're desperate for something, wow. So I think what I see with people and work with my leadership teams that I work with, what I'm looking at is what do they really, what do they get emotional about? And I can see that in
Welcome to the EQ Gangster podcast, where you will learn practical tools to grow your mental and emotional health and intelligence to be the best version of yourself, both at work and at home. It is real, raw, and transformational. The journey of emotional growth isn't easy, but it's worth it. I believe in you. This episode is sponsored by Arrowhead Leadership Consulting. What are your organization's biggest pain points right now? Low EQ leaders, weak managers, toxic culture, high turnover, low engagement, leader development, lagging behind company growth, no company career path. Let us know if your organization needs leadership coaching, workshops, training, or keynotes. Visit arrowhead-leadership.com for more details. Arrowhead-leadership.com.
Noble. How are you?
There he is. How are you, Jerry? Great to see you, sir.
It's nice to see you as well.
Likewise. It's been a couple months, I think.
Yeah, something like that. It was January, so gosh, it's hard to believe it's already March.
Yeah, January 24th is when we spoke. Yep. And
Yeah.
I think you were about ready to go on some trips. You were doing some travel.
Yeah, I had done some travel. I ended up working with a client and was traveling for that. And then um, Wednesday we leave for Phoenix for a vacation. So
Awesome.
yeah,
That'll
yeah,
be great. That'll be great. Excellent. Well, hopefully it'll be refreshing.
yeah. How are things with you? Everything good?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What I've been saying is ups and downs with mostly ups.
Good. That's a win, right? I read
Right.
one time, it was an Olympic athlete whose coach told them that there's a third, a third, a third. A third of the time you're average, a third of the time you're below average, a third of the time you're blowing it away. And I think that's
That's
kind of an
awesome.
interesting way to look at things.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's excellent. That's great. Well, I'm excited to interview you, Jerry. Any questions of me before we jump in?
No, not really. I think it's I was sitting here thinking about this morning, and hopefully it's something good for you. So good
Oh,
for
I
both
know
of
it's going to
us.
add value to
So
I know it's going to add value to the audience for sure.
good, good.
Yeah, definitely. So let me give you a couple admin things. So if I ask you a question that you feel uncomfortable answering, just tell me and we can edit it out and move on. It's not a big deal at all. Just let me know.
Okay,
And
okay,
then that's number one. And then number two is the last question. What I normally do is that's the opportunity where I'll say, okay, Jerry, how do people find you? How do they connect with you? Tell us your website, and that'll be the time, the opportunity to kind of promote what you do and your background. I mean, I'm going to ask you your background on the beginning, but you'll be able to promote your resources and website and all that stuff at the end.
okay, okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, awesome. Okay. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. EQ Gangster audience, I'm super excited to bring you all this next guest. I met Jerry a couple months ago, and he has such a tremendous background and some really fascinating insights that I think will I know will add value to you guys, because I took a page of notes, and when he and I were just having a regular conversation, I got some really good insights from Jerry. So Jerry's got a multi-decade career in coaching and consulting, and has worked with a number of different companies, a number of different leaders and stuff. And so I always find it fascinating to talking to people that have that much interaction with leaders and companies and the insights that they've learned. So, Jerry, super excited to get to know you more deeply during this interview.
Thanks, Noble. I appreciate that. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, awesome. So, can you share kind of your arc, how from as early as you're willing to start to how you ended up in what you're doing now with coaching and consulting?
Well, I grew up on a farm in Kansas, and it's not the most direct route to a business career, but I had some great, great mentors, and they've been able to help me work my way through things. Actually, started out in distribution, worked my way through several opportunities within the distribution world. To be honest, it was a small welding supply, but it was terrific. A great learning ground, had great mentors there. Jumped over to Black and Decker, same thing, great mentors. Spent several years in sales, marketing, operations, that type of thing. Then I went into Granger back into the distribution side and had a nice career there. And then I basically started my own company 20 years ago and really focused on how do we help people develop? How do we help hire the best people? How do we develop the best people into, from hiring to retiring? How do we create sustainable growth? And a large portion of that, as you and I spoke about earlier, has to do with balancing emotions and logic and being able to have conversations.
That's excellent. That's great, Jerry. So when we first met, you shared with me a story. What was your kind of first exposure or your first awareness to emotions?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I shared the story. I think the one you're talking about was when I was in the first grade. I was in a small country school. There were six kids in my grade, first grade, five five females and one male, me. And I don't know why. It was my first time really being away from home for a full day. But and I was the youngest of three kids, so I probably was a little spoiled. I don't want to admit that, but probably was. But I cried every day, every day. It was always something if I didn't get my way, or whether I got hurt or playing games or whatever it might be. But I found a way to cry every day, and I was fortunate because I had eighth and seventh and eighth graders that were kind of taking me under their wing. But my mother never knew about it until after the school year ended, and then the teacher sat down with her and shared that I cried every day. And I don't know what my mother did, but I can guarantee you I never cried a day after that. So it was kind of the first time I realized that as a man, a male, the expectation was that I wasn't to share emotions. I wasn't to be emotional. And so and I would say that probably as I moved forward, and I don't know that I truly understood that anger was an emotion or fear was an emotion, but I knew I wasn't going to cry. I had to keep everything inside. And so, through multiple injuries, through multiple times of having challenges, physically and mentally, I knew that I had to keep it inside. And that was a learning experience for me. And when it erupted, it would erupt in anger, and really probably screaming and hollering, and even physical. I mean, my brother and I loved each other dearly, but man, we could get in some fights. So I
Right, right.
think that was the story you were referring to, Noble.
That
So
was. That's
yeah,
exactly right.
yeah.
And when, Jerry, do you feel you started to kind of grow past that, like that time when, hey, you're not allowed to express emotions? When did you start to become self-aware?
That's an interesting question, and a great question, by the way. So when I was 16 years old, I was in a car accident and broke my pelvis and had a concussion. I was in a coma for 4 days. Just it was a nasty, nasty situation. And I think that was kind of I share this story. I had an old country doctor that was awesome, and I had a broken pelvis. It was badly, badly broken. And he said, Jerry goes, you need to get up and walk. He said, pain is your friend. It will tell you where to heal. And I think that was kind of when I first started thinking about the mental and the physical and emotional and the logical, and started thinking, I'm 16 years old, so there wasn't a lot of depth to it at that point. But it was when I first recognized that when he said pain is my friend, I think that was kind of the thing that took the fear out. So I had worked really hard all summer long, all the previous year to make sure I was starting on the basketball team as the point guard. And obviously that got taken away immediately. And I went to a doctor who was a orthopedic surgeon at that point and said, he told me before he ever saw me, he said, he goes, I don't know that you'll ever walk without a limp again. He goes, you certainly won't be playing basketball again. And 6 weeks after that, I was playing basketball again. So it was that, I think that whole point was I was so determined and so, and again, I had to be careful because of the anger, because I had worked so hard to get into something and then I couldn't do it. So it was, and that helped drive me to be pretty aggressive in coming back, but it was still, again, I realized that, how much the inner self can help the outer self.
Man, that's huge, Jerry. Huge. What have you observed in leaders regarding their ability to be aware of and manage emotions?
I think that, it's not so much my consulting business, but previous to my consulting business, as I was doing work with some of the companies that I worked with, that I could see where they made emotional decisions without stepping back from it and being perhaps understanding the bigger picture. It was something that was kind of a reactionary type of thing, and maybe the motivations were different. One of the things I think about a lot is that when you get into a situation where you feel emotion, you need to be aware of that. You need to step back and say, what is that? What's causing that? I had an example. I actually work with a nonprofit, and we put out a newsletter. So I put a newsletter article together and sent it to the head of marketing, and it got published after being edited by the head of marketing without my approval of the process. So my first thought was, I'm a little angry about this because it really changed the content and changed the messaging. And and then because I felt that, I knew that I needed to step back and wait. And that's also a good live conversation versus an email, because an email doesn't have context, right? Email doesn't have tone. So I thought that's a live conversation I need to have and share that changed the content of what we were trying to get across and the messaging we were trying to get across. Back to your question, though, I've seen a lot of emotional decisions that are very expensive. Something that was ego driven versus driven by what's the best for the customer, what's the best for the team that's working, with you. I've seen that happen multiple times, and part of my practice is I spend time with the leadership talking about what's important. My favorite line is always, a year from now we look back, what's going to define us as being successful. So, and how do we take that and be successful without, again, balancing the emotions with the logic? And they have to be balanced. I mean, you can't squash your emotions to the point of saying it's just logical. There's no business decision that's ever just logical. So how do you best understand that? That's self-awareness is hard, but apparently if you get hit in the head enough times like I have, it probably works. So,
I can relate. I can relate with that. Yeah, it's oh my goodness. I have had yes, I completely relate. It's like and I mean, thankfully now I am way more comfortable doing intentional reflection. But because I had no awareness and no tools and I had a lot of self hatred and self condemnation, I didn't want to do any reflection. And a leader who doesn't reflect is not a self aware leader and can cause some pretty significant consequences in their lives and organizations, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. It was interesting. About a week ago, I had one of my friends tell me, she said, you don't seem as grounded as you normally are. And I thought, man, what's changed? What am I doing that I'm not grounded? And so I was talking with my wife and sharing that with her. And she goes, how much time do you spend just reflecting, meditating? And, so I've had to, before I get into certain situations, and I think I need to probably do it on a more regular basis, is just sit and calm myself.
Love that. That's great. That's great. What what do you think has been one of the hardest things for you to learn either emotionally or in leadership?
Um, Another great question. Thank you. I would tell you the hardest thing for me I mean, this sounds maybe a little vague, so I'll give it some context. I went to the Center for Creative Leadership and spent a week in some deep stuff, right? And what I found was, or what I was told at the end of it was that I'm intimidating. And I'm not a big guy, and I couldn't figure out why I was intimidated or intimidating people. And what they basically said to me was that I can get to end results very quickly. I can see where the end result is, but if I don't bring the team with me, they're not going to be effective, and they're not going to understand it, and that's intimidation. And so I've on purpose had to make sure that, if I can see a clear end goal and how to get there, I have to be able to share that. And then I would tell you the other piece of that, and that was something I learned in my Black and Decker days. I had a great boss who one time said, I said, "Hey man, that's a great idea." He goes, "It's not the best idea." And I went, what do you mean?" He goes, "I put it out there." And he goes, "Then we build on it. It's better as a team." And I think, wow, that was a learning. So um, I think, if you consider ego an emotion, and it probably in some sense is, there's things that you do based on your ego that are emotional. It Having to get my ego in check and having to understand that has really been a great learning for me. And being able to then take that and mentor my team and set up and build things that allow people to develop on their own as well.
That's awesome. So that's a huge point that I want to ask you about is how do you or how have you or how does one keep their ego in check as a and like you as a successful leader, how do you keep your ego in check?
I actually have people that I trust very much to keep it in check, right? I'm giving them permission. And some people that are great friends of mine, I don't have to give them permission. They know how to check the ego for me. So um, the same person that told me that I wasn't as grounded as she remembered will also check my ego. And I would tell you, my wife will check my ego, and my kids check my ego. So I give them permission to, because they know it doesn't, I don't, the Ted Lasso saying of "Don't be judgmental, be curious." I think that's what I try to make sure that I don't get judgmental or I don't get my feelings hurt. Again, I have fairly low empathy when it comes to that. It doesn't bother me a great deal. So, but I do realize that it's the truth. If I'm getting out of hand, people have to tell me I'm getting out of hand.
That's excellent. So so it so in order to have that dynamic, you had to build that before you needed it. So how have you developed your tribe or community?
Um, I don't know that it was intentional. It's not a coincidence, but I don't know that it was intentional the way I did it. It's just you develop a trust with people, and you do that through being honest with them and 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 getting honest feedback from them. And then the other thing is if somebody does give you feedback, you don't react in a negative way. You take it in and observe it and absorb it. And and I'd go back and say you also have to ask them questions of what their intent is. Ask a lot of questions to get deeper to really, somebody can tell me my ego's out of hand, and I have to get deeper and understand why, what they're seeing and how they're seeing it and why they're seeing it. So and again, I don't know that that's anything I really ever thought about as an intentional piece, but I've been surrounded by great people. Like I said, I had great mentors all along, and I don't know why they would be helping me and mentoring me other than they're just good people.
That's awesome. That's great. What's something that as you are a leader developer, how are you what's something recently that you have done or are doing to develop yourself?
Um, I work on this every year. Noble, I say, okay, how can I remain relevant? Because if I'm not relevant, then why would anybody ever utilize my company? So the last piece I did is I thought, I've always said need to ask great questions to understand, but what's the process of doing that? So I took a class in the art of the question. What was great about it was that the gentleman who taught it was so skilled at asking great questions. And he had a process to it, but it wasn't structured. So what I'm doing is building structure into it right now for myself. What are the objections you hear? How would you ask that or answer that with a question versus trying to answer it differently? First one always comes to mind is your price is too high. And then, most people would come back and say, no, it's not, or whatever it is, they'd start justifying why that price is high. My first question is, what are you comparing it to? And then what's the return on investment for you? Which is why I go back to what's success look like a year from now? So I think that's from a self-development standpoint, that's what I'm looking at. Um, Beyond that, I mean, there's a myriad of little things you always look at and try to improve upon. But that's really, I would tell you too, the other piece that I'm looking at and working on right now is how you and I met, right? It was through LinkedIn, but it wasn't me trying to sell you on anything or you trying to sell me on anything. It's a social network that's business oriented, but it's how can I don't look at it as if I can't sell you something, I'm not interested in you. I look at it as I want to make friends. I want to understand everybody's background and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. Maybe I can help. And maybe that help is not me personally. Maybe it's a referral to somebody that I know that can.
Yeah, love that. That's excellent. That's excellent. And it's always it seems like when you have that approach, God always finds a way to bless you.
Yeah,
It just
absolutely.
it just really seems like that.
And you may want to, you can talk about divine intervention, you can talk about karma, you can talk about, a Buddhism piece, which is, there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. But my point is it's human nature to want to be in relationships. And so how do we as humans um, develop relationships? And it's really helping each other. And so it's one-on-one like this, or it's against, across groups like you do with your podcast.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. What what role do emotions play in business or leadership?
This is going to sound a little strange, but I think again, it comes back to if you're doing something and it doesn't feel right, if it just doesn't feel right in your gut, you got to stop and take a look at that. I think about, I started this business 20 years ago. For the first 4 or 5 years, I was always worried about where the next client would come from. and so there was an element of fear in that. And so I think once I got comfortable past that time frame and knew I could support the team and I could do, support my family and that type of thing, um, I was able to overcome that fear and become, I think, better at what I do. Because then I want, people can smell desperation. If you're desperate for something, wow. So I think what I see with people and work with my leadership teams that I work with, what I'm looking at is what do they really, what do they get emotional about? And I can see that and I use some assessment tools that people feel really good about when they, because then they understand themselves, and somebody else understands them, and I work with clients that were founders that have had, get to a certain stage and they're kind of overwhelmed. And again, fear comes in, anger comes in, all those types of things. And then being able to just show the next steps, the next two or three steps that they can make relieves that. And, they get pretty excited about that thing. So I think that's where emotions come into business is use it as a gauge. If you feel like you're doing something and it doesn't feel right, step back and look at it. Why? Understand why. And I'm probably the worst to say you got to back up and look at it because I have this high need for speed. Uh, I have a super high energy level, which I have to temper, and you know, so if somebody wants to do something that feels like it needs to be done in 2 weeks, um, it's hard for me to say, hey, it can be a month, but it does. I mean, so I'm learning. I'm still learning.
That's awesome. That's right. That's great. And based on, all your years of consulting and coaching, I mean, and obviously just being in the business world, period, how how well have you observed leaders being able to keep their personal and professional emotional lives separate?
It's very difficult. I mean, it's we talk about work-life balance, and I think it's really challenging. And again, because it's my company and I've been doing this for 20 years, that there is no work-life balance. It's work is my life, life is my work. I set and I prioritize things. My family comes first, and then it's my workouts and my golf comes down the list, and it goes a little further down the list every time I shoot poorly. But it's the thing. I put my priorities in place, right? And try to work from that standpoint. I think both my kids are very successful in business, but neither of my kids travel at all. There's very little, if the possible. If they travel, it's for vacations and enjoying that kind of thing, not so much on the business side. And I think why they did that was because I had priorities kind of out of kilter. I traveled 80% of the time at one point in my career. And back 30, 40 years ago when I was traveling, there was a big deal. I would go out for 2 weeks because I was doing a turnaround on a company. I wouldn't be home for 2 weeks, and that's really hard on the kids. So they don't want to do that to their families. So I think, it's different today than it was then, obviously. And you want to have a understanding what your priorities are. Where do you spend your time? What I would say is you can chase the dollar in business, and there's things that you can do though that you can balance that with your other priorities, whether it be family or social or whatever it may be. But and I find a lot of leaders, and again, this was early on in my career. A lot of leaders at that point, it was business was everything, and the family was far down the list.
Well, and I think that oftentimes it's we get that dopamine from achieving and that feeling of the hunt and eating what you kill, and there's a lot of serotonin and dopamine that's going on under the surface, so a lot of people aren't even aware of. And so, that's, I think there's a lot of folks who can probably relate with that. And, you know, and obviously we all have to make our own decisions on priorities, like you said, is what, what should, what should that look like for you? And then do you have the ability as a leader to, because I would argue that the Western mindset, the Western culture is more is always better.
Yeah.
And is it right? Is a million enough? Well, no, it's never. No, it's got to be 10 million. Okay, well, now you're at 10 million. Well, okay, well, it's got to be 20 million. Like, it's when is it? What number, right? It is the number, right? Is it? But and oftentimes there's studies on this, right? Is it's not a destination, it's the pursuit. So how can you make the pursuit fit your values, essentially, right? So kind of like what you were sharing there, Jerry.
Yeah,
So
and I think, Noel, one of the things that people should perhaps recognize is that they don't have to do it all themselves. And you know what? If you have a great team, and I've got a client I'm working with who's just an exceptional person, kind of getting burnt out. And I met with he and his team recently, and most people when they hire, they try to hire like themselves. He did. He hired people that fill out. I mean, it's amazing. He's the only one that has his profile. Everybody else is somewhat of a different profile. And so I sat down with the team and was doing some whiteboard thinking about actions that they could take. And they're brilliant. And so one of the things that I was sharing with him is, you're hitting burnout because you're trying to do everything. You've got a great team, develop your team. And the way you develop your team is to delegate to them, let them do a project. And oh, by the way, let them fail. If they need to fail, fail fast, learn from it, move on. It's never a failure if you learn from it. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's really the truth. And he and I have been working together now for about a month, and already starting to see some positive signs based on the work that they're doing and how he's bringing other people into our meetings and helping them work as well.
that's awesome. That's great, Jerry. That's excellent. That's excellent. What's a question that you are chewing on lately?
Well, it's a technology question. So when I go in and work with clients, I start with four things. I look at strategy, people, process, and technology. With AI is changing things dramatically. What I the good news is AI can do things really fast. The bad news is, are we all going to sound alike? That's my thing that I'm working on. So how do we utilize technology that makes us better? How's it a teammate versus replacement? So as a teammate, can it do some of the things that we have been doing manually as an example, research. So if I'm researching a company, I have to go four or five different places and write it down myself, or can I punch it into Chat GPT or some other AI piece and have it work out for me? Then my focus can be on the relationship. It can be on the solutions, and I'm not spending all the time doing reach outs or not spending all the time doing research. And it's kind of interesting as I go through these four areas that I work on. As I understand the challenges within a company, now I can start plugging them in, and it's putting a puzzle piece together. So that's the kind of stuff I'm thinking about all the time. Again, that goes back to the relevance piece. If I made my entire career out of working with sales and marketing, right? So if if somebody's coming into sales and marketing, there may be a bit of fear that, again, go back to that emotional fear of new technology. Um, and I'm also realizing that my grandkids have never been without a cell phone. I mean, they don't have a cell phone, but they've never been without technology. My kids, really were in technology early on. Both of them are in their businesses are technology, they're tech businesses. So it's kind of those things about, what value can somebody, in the later stages of their career, what value can they bring? Uh, I had a company I was talking to. They said that since COVID, nobody wants to talk to them anymore. There's no face-to-face meetings anymore. Everything is Zoom or quite frankly, they just don't want to even talk to people. So how do you go about making that? How do you establish that relationship and add value if somebody doesn't want to talk to you? So that's kind of the world I'm working on right now.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And that is that's a real dynamic. You know, it's another way I've heard it said is we are more digitally connected and more lonely than ever before, right? And so it's not a direct correlation to what you shared, but the point is that even though we're hyper connected digitally, I think some people have taller silos almost as a result. I don't know. I haven't. It just that's kind of how it feels. I know for me, like I get I no less than 10 to 15 sales pitches a day on LinkedIn in my inbox. It's like, hey, I've got this, whatever business, and I mean, it would be a full-time job just for me to take these sales pitches that I'm getting every day, right? And so for me, it's you've got to be super extra clever and intentional. And I'm not even a big cheese. I'm not some big baller business guy, but even for me, I have some pretty high walls to get in to connect with me because of that dynamic. It's just everything is a pitch, and I just don't have time to hear sales pitches all day. And so
Yeah,
to your point of just people that for me, when I bring my walls down, it's people that I feel like genuinely want to connect and add value. Like then I'll like, okay, I'd love to just connect. If we're just going to connect, I love that. And then from there, if there's an opportunity where I can add value to you, 100%, I'm totally down with that. But um, it's the people that start with sales. It just it just shuts me down.
it's really interesting you say that because I'm the same way. I get 15 or so emails that people can solve my problems, emails or LinkedIn, and the challenge is how do you solve a problem you don't even know that I have? And that to me is just hoping that something sticks, and that's the wrong approach. My belief is understand the person, understand their business, understand socially first. Then, if there's a solution, terrific. Then, if you can help, terrific. I'm going to go back to this gentleman I was telling you about that had the art of the question. One of the things he said, and he said his daughter was going to a new high school, and she was fairly shy. So he said to her, ask three questions before you ever share anything about yourself. Ask three questions about them before you share anything about yourself. And I thought that was brilliant. And I think if people would do that in business, if they would ask questions about the individual, and certainly you have to do your research up front. That's what AI is for, right? Do your research on the individual, on the company, but ask good, strong questions about themselves. And you get the benefit of learning and meeting and understanding people. But the other side of it is that you're not just ramming business or trying to sell something. I once had a company I was doing work with had two different divisions. So the VP of sales and marketing in one division utilized me all the time. We still talk to this day. I don't do business with them, but I talk to him once every few months. The other division, the guy told me that he came from an operations background. He said, I feel like you're trying to sell me every time I talk to you. And I went, ooh, that's on me. What am I doing? So I backed away from that. We still did some work with that division, but it was, again, you have to match your conversation with the individual you're speaking with.
Right. Which in my opinion takes social awareness, which is EQ. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. EQ
Yeah.
is the critical piece, and most, yeah, you can recognize pretty quickly when somebody doesn't have EQ, right? And when you get into those situations, you do the best you can, but just realize that maybe some people just don't have good social skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jerry, what So what kind of wrapping up here, what advice, you work with a lot of leaders and you spend time in a lot of different companies. What what advice would you give to a leader who wants to be successful today?
Um, well, Jerry today versus Jerry 20 years ago gives different advice. Jerry today would say, block time on your calendar to think, whether it's in the morning before you get started, in the middle of the day, whatever your downtime is. Mine, it, typically 2 o'clock in the afternoon is when I kind of slow down, and then I get another burst of energy. But I also block 7 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the morning. That's my downtime. That's my time to think. That's my time to plan. That's my time to future meditate. So it's so I'm grounded, but that's the biggest thing. I think we go so hard at things and we try so hard to be so good so fast. That's when you get out of control. So it's um and my brother had some great sayings about those kind of things, and he used to tell me, slow down to speed up. And I thought that was a great little saying that I kind of took to heart in the last 10 or 15 years. Slow down to speed up. Enjoy the downtime you have. Again, in my world, I'm really busy, and then I'm not as busy, and I'm really busy, and I've learned to enjoy that time when I'm not as busy. And what I would say to somebody who's in a corporate environment where you're constantly, new things constantly coming, block that time for yourself. Block some time for you to think, to self-reflect, because it's such a critical piece of what we do.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I've got a new friend. I've got a few new friends I've recently met here in Austin, and I was talking to one of the guys yesterday, and we were talking about his name's Jeff. He's a super high speed entrepreneur, and we were talking about this concept of community. That's something I'm chewing on recently is community and tribes and stuff. Just
Hmm.
and so he's a global citizen. He travels. He's a again big cheese and one of the things that we discussed was the mindset in America again is it's almost like we we live to work. Like work is first, and then everything else we fit everything else in the nooks and crannies. God, family, we just stick them in the crevices of our work gaps. But in Europe, like I've been to Spain and Italy, they do not do that. They work to live. And
Yeah.
so their schedule is day and night is based around family and friend time, and they stick in the gaps work, right? Which is just such a fascinating concept. So again, kind of to your point that if we don't make and take the time to reflect, like what are we doing this for? What's the another guy, super entrepreneur, um, phenomenal dude, a guy named Zach, and you know, he he's in a phase where he's like taking a lot of reflection time, like what is this all for? And like to increase gratitude of like, man, be thankful where I'm at. Like always be thankful for, I mean, we have thousands of things to be thankful for, but what I've noticed in a lot of leaders is gratitude is a muscle. And if you don't exercise that gratitude, you will have very weak gratitude muscles. And I think well, not I think, there's also research on this. Gratitude is the regular, consistent practice of gratitude improves mental health. It's like an actual, like legit improves mental health. And so, um, you know, again, to your point, like just the reflection of like, okay, what is this for? At the end of the day, we're on our deathbed. We look back, what's our thought? What are we thinking? Man, 5 more minutes in the office. Man, if I could have made another $5 million, if I could have got that, 20 27 BMW, whatever, whiz bang. Like, what is this all for? What's it all? Or the other one, oh man, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but it's like if you if you if you had 10, would you want $10 million, or would you rather $10 million and you die tomorrow, or would you want to live and not have $10 million? What's And most people pick, well, I'd rather live.
Yeah.
Okay, so then why are you wasting your life for money, chasing money, right? That whole concept. Anyway, um, yeah, fascinating stuff, Jerry. Really appreciate your insights. Any final comment that you would like to
You know
share?
what? Just a couple things. One is, I think it's generational, the work to live versus live to work. I think it's generational. I think as a baby boomer, it's always been, we work to be, all the time. Work is first. I would tell you, my kids are millennials, and they work to be able to have fun, to be able to travel, to be able to afford things that they want to afford. But it's also, that again, I think it's a more of a balanced approach that they have. The other piece I would tell you, and I every morning that my wife and I get up and have coffee, that's our routine. We get up and have coffee. And the question we ask each other before we get ready for work is, what are you grateful for today? And, after a while, it kind of becomes almost routine. But I do believe what you said. If you practice gratitude, and gratitude is, and generosity are very closely related. Gratitude is being grateful for what others have been able to help you with. Generosity is being able to give without expecting a return. And I think that, I mean, that's the way I view it. So I think that practicing those kind of thoughts free you up to do all kinds of good things. And I think, again, I think you're starting to see a shift of people saying, more of the European kind of piece, where you're uh, you're enjoying life as you go. And I did a lot of reading, and when I started this business 20 years ago, I was stepping off a treadmill that was going 900 mph. And again, the first several years, I was concerned about, would I be able to afford to live. And then it's become, yes, I know I can afford to live. I'm going to enjoy things while I can. I can work from anywhere, and maybe I work a couple hours a day on vacation, but it's a couple hours a day before everybody else gets up, and then I'm done. And then and so I have family in St. Louis. I have family here in Austin. I'm meeting my family from Kansas in Phoenix this week. We're headed to spring training. And you know what? I'm going to work, but we're going to watch baseball, and doesn't get any better than that. So it's just it's that's how I believe you balance life. You put them together, work and again, I think your insights are really right on with that, as far as being able to enjoy your time while you're doing it. You That's why I keep going back to, what success look like a year from now. Is it more time with your family? Is it hey, you know what? I got to see my son play baseball 3 times this a week. Um, I was very fortunate when I was living in St. Louis, and I was given the responsibility to do a turnaround for Texas for a company. And I said to my boss, I said, that was moving me. I said, listen, man, my son's a senior in high school. He's playing basketball. He's playing baseball. I can't go all week long. He goes, when are his games? And I said, Tuesdays and Fridays. He said, well, fly down on Wednesday morning, come home on Thursday night. And that's the way we did it. And I got to see every one of my son's games. So that was important. And especially when he tore his ankle his first at bat. Just anyway, that's another story. But I was there when he was supportive of that. So
That's
anyway,
awesome, Jerry. So now,
uh,
Jerry, how do we how do we connect with you? How do we find more out about your business, your website, your resources, all that stuff? How do we connect with you?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I have a website. The name of the company is Nine Runs, Nineruns. So it's nineruns.com. And it's a pretty good explanation of what I do. If you put in Jerry Phillips into LinkedIn, put Nine Runs or Austin, Texas behind it, and you'll find me that way. You can email me, you can call me. Those numbers are on both locations, the email and that. But I will tell you, I made a mistake when I set up initially. It was going to be a family business 20 years ago. And so I put everybody's initials on it. So JD Phillips at nineruns.com. Nobody knows my middle name is D, so I should have just put Jerry. And my son's name is Jeremy, and my daughter's name is Jessica. I put their middle initials. Nobody knows their middle initials, so that was a mistake. But anyway, it's JD Phillips at nineruns.com. No, I really appreciate this. This was fun, the conversation. It's great to get to know you and spend time with you. And I love your story too. So thank you for letting me share my ideas.
Absolutely, Jerry. Look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thanks again for all your insights and wisdom.
Thank you.